Welcome back to ADHDKC Conversations. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristen Stuppy, and today I'm excited to introduce my new co-host, Dr. Caroline Danda. If her name sounds familiar, you're right. She's been a parent group speaker several times at ADHDKC, and we always hear great feedback from her talks.
Well, I'm very excited to be here, and I think it was destined that I eventually joined the ADHDKC board, and so I'm very excited to jump in and be part of the ADHDKC community. I just love helping families understand just how we think, how kids think, feel, function, because then we can meet them where they're at.
Yes. So I have been pestering Dr. Danda for years to join our board. And now that she finally agreed, she's jumping right in with taking the host position for the parent group. So we're so excited to have her joining us. And each month on this podcast, we sit down with the experts, parents, individuals, the ADHD community, basically, to explore topics that make a real difference for families in the Kansas City area and beyond.
And I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Jennifer Dilts, who is also one of our newest ADHD KC board members as well. She's a pediatrician here in Kansas City. She focuses on ADHD, anxiety, and headaches, which, if you didn't know, they actually have some crossover, which I'm sure Dr. Dilts will share a little bit about that during our podcast today. So I'm looking forward to get to know more about her and what she has to offer in terms of insights into these topics. She's deeply involved in helping families better understand how the brain works in kids and teens. So I'm sure this will be a fantastic episode as always.
Yeah, and Dr. Dilts and I also have had the chance to work together in the Teach Me ADHD program that was initiated by Dr. Nursa Bauer in Indianapolis area. And so we lead groups of kids and their parents through learning about ADHD in online classes with a really fun detective theme. It's so much fun to do that. So that's how Dr. Dilts and I got to know one another. And again, I recruited her to be part of this team. So I'm very excited that she recently started helping me with the ADHDKC teen events, and she's going to help me run those monthly events. So she's just really jumping in there as well. This is like podcast of power, right? So I just can't wait to let our listeners get to know both of you guys today.
Yeah. Well, I think we should get started and jump into getting to know Dr. Dilts and learn from all of her clinical experience. So I know she has a wealth of training and research and background that she draws from, but she also has a lot of lived experience. So I'm really excited to hear more about how to help kids with ADHD, anxiety, and headaches.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. I am so excited to be here, and I love being a part of ADHDKC as well.
Well, as Dr. Danda already mentioned, you've built a practice that focuses on ADHD, anxiety, and headaches, which for a lot of people might seem very unrelated. And so I would love for you to kind of walk us through your journey, what led you to focus on those three areas in particular.
Yes, great question. And like you said, they don't at first glance necessarily seem like they would fit together, but they sure do. And I started out my career as a pediatrician doing general pediatrics and developed an interest in both procedural pain and chronic pain, and found my way to the headache clinic here at our local children's hospital, and did additional training during my time there in both headache management, and got my board certification for headache. And we were using a lot of acupuncture to treat headaches. And so I also got board certified in medical acupuncture at that point. And about 3 years ago, transitioned to private practice here in Kansas City. And in addition to treating kids and teens with headaches, I also decided that I wanted to also treat ADHD and anxiety and depression. And there were several reasons for that. The first is these conditions tend to really run together. If you have one, it's not uncommon to also have a second or sometimes a third of these conditions. And the interesting thing is if you make one of those conditions better, usually the other one gets better too. So if I have someone that is really struggling with migraine, it's hard to make much progress with the migraine if anxiety is also really bad. Or if a child has
Yeah.
significant ADHD, but anxiety is also a big player, or migraine that's disrupting sleep and school attendance, then it's going to be hard to make progress with the other. So that's one of the reasons, is that when we treat any of those conditions, it helps the others too. A lot of the lifestyle and non-medication management for these conditions are the same. So we talk a lot about nutrition and exercise and managing sleep and all of those good foundational pediatric topics. And then I also just really like talking to kids and families about how brains work and how our emotional state and stress level and those kinds of things are really related to physical symptoms. And so all of these conditions are just really related, and it's just something I really like talking about and helping kids and families with. And it feels really rewarding to have kids and parents come back and be like, oh, things are going so much better.
I'm
How
really fascinated how much kids learn. Like once you give them education and about the brain and what's happening, how much that understanding can really help, like even their anxiety, because a lot of the unknown. So once they understand how their brain works, what's going on, it's like they're able to move forward in a lot better way and understand the strategies that are there. So I love that you're doing that.
Yeah, I think it really gives them a sense of agency. It takes this thing, whether it's migraine or anxiety or ADHD, and once they understand it and they understand that, hey, it's not your fault that you have this condition, like a lot of that is a genetic thing that you were just kind of born more susceptible to or predisposed to. But there are lots of things that you can do that can help to manage this condition. And so I think it just feels good to understand how your brain works and understand some of the things that you can do to help those conditions so that you don't feel as powerless about it.
Yeah, I very much feel like you mentioned how just the basics of eating right and sleeping and um, helping to calm the brain is it's all so very important. Um, and I like that you work to teach kids a lot of these things. When you also use acupuncture to help kids with headache management, how does that work?
Yeah, we are still trying to completely understand how acupuncture works. It's been around for a really long time, and there are several different mechanisms through which it works. One of the main ones is it when you stimulate different acupuncture sites on the body. So a big one is like right here on the hand. It causes your brain to release endorphins. So those natural neurotransmitters or chemicals that help to decrease pain and stress. And so this is one of the reasons why I talk to kids about, hey, I can actually help make your headaches better by treating this point on your hand or a point on your leg or your ear. So it doesn't all have to be in the scalp. And a lot of times it's not primarily in the scalp where we're placing needles. And so that's one of the big reasons, is that it helps with endorphin release. And so just kind of relaxing the body to help with pain and stress. And then we will also sometimes use points that are more related to where kids have pain or adults have pain with their migraines. And so that can be back at the kind of the base of the skull in the occipital area. And in that way, we think it's changing the neuromodulation, or it's kind of helping to desensitize those nerves, like the occipital nerves that are part of the headache generators. So several different ways how it that it works. And one of the things that I really like about acupuncture is, in addition to helping with pain, a lot of times it can help with anxiety, it can help with sleep, it can help with just kind of this overall feeling of well-being or resilience. And I always tell kids, if they've seen acupuncture portrayed in the media at all, so movies or pictures or that kind of thing, it looks way more dramatic and scary than it is. I tell kids the needles are like teeny tiny little thin bendy wires, and they don't even photograph well because they're so tiny. And a lot of times we'll use 4 or 5 for an initial acupuncture treatment. And one thing I like about acupuncture is it's really, really flexible. And so sometimes I have kids and they're like, well, I would be okay with one right here in my hand, but I don't want any in my feet. Or I would be okay with one in my scalp, but I don't want it, you know, in my upper arm or something. And so there are over 300 acupuncture points on the body. And so I really work with my kids. Number one, I want them to feel comfortable with it if we're trying acupuncture. And so they get a lot of say in where we're placing the needles. And I always tell kids, you know, if we place a needle somewhere and you don't like it, then we just take it out and we can always kind of regroup, or we can use, there are little tiny stickers that have a teeny tiny tack, like a 0.9 millimeter tack in the middle, and they look like little circular Band-Aid stickers. And so sometimes we'll use those either instead of needles or in addition to needles. And so it can be a better experience than, you know, there's a
Yeah.
lot of parents that are like, my kid would never try acupuncture. And a lot of times once I show them what we're actually talking about as far as the teeny tiny needles or those kinds of things, then they're like, oh, okay, maybe I could try that. So yeah, it's been a fun thing to be able to incorporate. The other thing that I really love about it is migraine prevention medicines, headache prevention medicines and supplements, they take a long time to work, like 2 to 3 months a lot of times. And what's fun about acupuncture is a lot of times kids will feel a little better right away. And so that's a really fun thing, both for me and for my patients and their families, that in addition to these other prevention things like working on sleep or hydration or stress management or starting magnesium or whatever it is, it's nice to be able to do something that may help them to feel better right away.
You know, it's funny as you're talking, I've always thought it was hokey because,
Yeah.
you know, I learned the science. Med school doesn't teach anything about pressure points or any
Yeah.
of that stuff. But in junior high, a teacher would not let anybody go to the nurse for anything. And when somebody would complain of a headache, she would tell them to squeeze like right here. And I still do
Yes.
that. When my head hurts, I will put pressure like
Yeah.
right here. And when I have a headache, it hurts my hand to do that, but it makes my head feel better. And it
Yeah.
doesn't last very long, but
Yeah.
now you have
Now you
some,
know why.
yeah, there's a pressure point right there. And it does work. And it
Yes.
doesn't involve needles. So
Yes.
I guess kids could just do the
It's
pressure
good.
if they don't want the needle point. But it
Yeah,
sounds like the
exactly.
needles are
And
super
yeah,
tiny. So that is
I will talk to kids about that. Like,
fascinating.
hey, this point right here that we use for acupuncture, you can also have your mom kind of press on this area or rub this area, or you can do it yourself. Just kind of like we teach other self-regulation strategies that I know both of you do a lot with
Mhm.
your kiddos
Yeah.
in your offices. This is another thing that gives kids something to do that can be helpful when they're feeling stressed or having pain. So absolutely.
I think you answered some of the questions that came up for me because I am thinking, as you know, I mean, you work with kids that have anxiety too, and they're
Mhm.
like needles, no shots, no. They're all no, no, no. And so I love the way you were framing it as like again, you start with this basis of education and why we're going to do, and you demystify the process. So you really kind of get them used to the idea. You don't just be like, hey, here's a needle and we're going to go for it. So I really
Right.
appreciate how you couched it, and I could see where kids might be more receptive to maybe trying it, and that they get relief. The idea of getting relief from the migraine would definitely be a bonus on that. So, again, education seems to be one of the primary precursors to having effective treatment. And one of the things that I love that you are also doing is the ADHD Mom podcast. Or which
Yeah.
is the ADHD Mom Docs podcast. That's a new one that you're doing, I think, with Dr. Nursa Bauer. I want to know more about how you expanded into that space, what you've learned from those conversations, and give us a little bit of your take on it.
Yes. So you're exactly right. Dr. Narissa Bauer and I started the ADHD Mom Docs podcast last summer. So August of 2025 was when we released our first episodes. And Dr. Bauer is a behavioral pediatrician in Indianapolis. She specializes in ADHD. And she had done a podcast by herself and was wanting to take a break from that, and then approached me and said, would you ever want to do a podcast? And I said, I don't know anything about the nuts and bolts of a podcast as far as like the editing and all that stuff. And she said, you don't have to do that part. I'll do that part.
Me neither.
If you yes, exactly. And it has just been so much fun. So thank you for asking me about that. I think it came about because Dr. Bauer and I both just really love talking with other professionals. We're both really curious, probably like both of you. We got into this field because we love learning, and there are always new things to learn. And the other reason that I think it's so fun is it can be kind of lonely when you're in private practice. And even if you've got a couple of people that are in your office with you, we're all busy and go in different directions. And so I just love to be able to bounce things off of Narissa and kind of go back and forth with her. And it just keeps me really sharp and fresh, because when we have sleep questions, we're like, oh, what sleep doc can we call to be on our podcast? Or these specific medication questions, who's a good pediatric psychiatrist who can come on and answer that? And so we just have had a really good time finding guests who want to be on. And the other reason, I guess, that we started the podcast and feel passionately about it is, just like I do, that our time is limited with our patients and their families as far as being in clinic. And also there's only so much that we can all absorb in a short amount of time in a clinic visit. And so when we first started the podcast, we thought, what are the things that we really want patients and their parents to know when they're first starting out on this ADHD path, as far as what does it look like to get a diagnosis? What are the things that they can be thinking about, that we're thinking about? What are the next steps? What are things to consider with medications? What are things to consider with therapy? What are school accommodations, and what can those look like? And how do you advocate for your child? And so we like that these are bite-sized amounts of information. We try to keep the podcasts to about 30 minutes each time. And we also kept it conversational, because we know that when we are listening to podcasts, we like them to be kind of like you're listening to your friends talk, or something like that. And so we just felt like there was a good space or market for a podcast that is done by pediatricians who are also moms, and who are talking to kids and teens in the clinic every day.
It's really great that families can have a trusted source. I think that is one of the challenges with all the information out there. It's like, where do I go for information? I might want information. How do I get it? I mean, I have a stack of books like, this big that I still haven't read yet.
Yes,
So I
me
often will
too.
go to the podcast, and I like to listen to the podcast. So I love that there's a trusted source with pediatricians that can answer all those questions that sometimes we didn't even know we had, but there's information that's important that we know.
Oh, well, thank you so much for saying that. That is always the highest praise, when we hear from a colleague that they're listening to it and that they like it and recommend it. So thank you so much for saying that.
Hmm. Well, I want to swing back. We've kind of touched upon anxiety a little bit, and it shows up in so many different ways. And so often parents don't even think of anxiety. They think their child is angry or something else. So, from your perspective, what
Oppositional.
are some oppositional? Yes.
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
believe in the diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder. I don't ever
I
give that
I agree
diagnosis
with
to
you. There's always something
Uh,
underneath it causing the oppositional behavior, but that's another topic probably to get into at a later time. But
totally. Um, but yeah, I guess, can you just maybe speak to some of the ways that you might recognize anxiety, even if a family is not immediately understanding what it is?
Yes, I think this is such a great question because you both know that we see this a lot where it's so rare that a child or teen even will say, I'm really anxious or I am struggling because of anxiety. It comes out in so many different ways. And there are physical symptoms for sure, especially in our younger kids. And a lot of times that's headache or that's belly pain. And that pain is really real. We know that that pain is a real thing.
Mhm.
And also sometimes that can be that's how your body is telling you that it's stressed or it's anxious. And so when we address the anxiety, those physical symptoms get better. It can come out as not being able to sleep. We see that a lot. And then, Kristen, just like you alluded to, a lot of times kids are really irritable or they're really angry. And the other thing I see a lot, that you guys were both kind of talking about is just these kind of explosions. And sometimes parents will say, it just came out of nowhere. He was fine. And then this little thing totally set him off. And it's interesting because a lot of times when you really dig in further, I think about it as, oh, this poor kiddo was like, if one is barely any anxiety and 10 is panic, this kid's walking around at like a 9 out of 10 on the anxiety scale all day at school, and he's holding it together, and then he gets home to a safe place, and his sister takes the juice box or the last cookie or whatever it is, and he just completely melts down, and it's this big thing where really that's just the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing. It's been all of these things that he's been trying to hold together all day at school. And a lot of times parents will say, we just feel like we're walking on eggshells. Like we just
Yeah.
never know when he's going to explode. Or so that is a lot of ways that anxiety comes out. Um, it's interesting. I love talking to parents and kids about how whether you're a little kid or even an adult or a teenager, anxiety tends to kind of behave the same way. And it also tends to
Mhm.
behave the same way no matter what you're anxious about. If you're a little kid and you have separation anxiety, if you're a middle schooler and you're afraid of snakes, if you're an adult and you're afraid of public speaking, like we all kind of have a lot of those same physical symptoms. And then we have our brains kind of do the same things. And a lot of the times, what happens with anxiety is our brains underestimate our ability to cope. So we don't think we're able to handle something like, I'm not going to be able to go to school today because I may say something embarrassing or I won't know what to say when the teacher calls on me. Then we underestimate our ability to cope. So we already are overestimating the chances of something bad or scary happening. We underestimate the ability that we'll be able to handle it. And so what do we want to do? We want to avoid. And so I think it's helpful for people to kind of know about this cycle, because then we can really work on recognizing these things and working with kids and families to intervene, because it makes sense to me that as parents we want our kids to feel safe and we want them to be comfortable and happy. And so if they're wanting to avoid school in the short term, we may say, yeah, I understand, like you don't feel good or you're really stressed, let's not go to school today. And then the kid feels better, the parent feels better because the kid feels better. But then unfortunately, the child doesn't learn that they actually can push through that and cope. They don't get that good experience. And then tomorrow that same cycle is repeating. So that's another way we tend to see anxiety show up, is in avoidance. And then anxious brains really want certainty, right? They want to know what's going to happen next. And so we hear a lot of like, well, what's going to happen next? And what's happening today? And what's happening tomorrow? And what will happen if this happens? And they want a lot of reassurance too. And so kids may ask, well, how do you know dad's not going to get in a car accident? And the parent may answer, and then the child may say, wait, ask that same question like over and over again. Or during this time of year, sometimes we have it with tornadoes where a child may say, I'm worried there's going to be a tornado. And the parent may say, oh, I don't think that's going to happen. And the kid will say, well, how do you know? And then the parent will say, well, let's look at the weather app. And maybe that reassures the child for a few minutes, but then half an hour later, that child again is like, well, I'm still really worried. It still looks kind of dark
Right.
outside. And so parents get into this like cycle of having to do more and more reassurance. And so, yeah, it's just really interesting how anxious brains work.
Yeah, I think that broad overview and talking about how anxiety has all these different roots, when it comes down to it, our brains are designed to worry. That saves us, right?
Yes.
Kept us in the caveman days
Yes.
from dying. So it's
Yes.
self-preservation and it's necessary. but learning how to cope is so important. And all the different ways that it can look, even though it has that same root. I think you're going to
Yeah.
talk more about that when you do your parent groups talk next month.
Yes.
So don't want to ask too
Yes.
many questions about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. What I find
Yeah.
really fascinating, though, is that overlap between ADHD and anxiety a lot of times because I see so many kids, and I'm sure you do too, where there's that overlap of a lot of times, with ADHD, there's a lot, your brain is just moving super fast, right? And it's kind of a regulation issue, but also anxiety is a regulation issue. And so, like, it can be,
Yeah.
it's too hard to like slow down. And so, or I'm having trouble focusing and then I'm not learning. And then now I'm anxious that I'm not learning and now I can't concentrate. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about a little bit of the overlap between the ADHD and anxiety.
Yes, absolutely. You make really good points. And depending on which studies or statistics you look at, about half of kids and teens who have ADHD also meet criteria for an anxiety disorder. And so that's a lot of kids and teens that we're seeing that have both ADHD and anxiety. And just like you talked about, what's interesting is that the symptoms of those two conditions can look the same. If a child is really fidgeting and having a hard time sitting still, that can be because of that child's ADHD. It can also be because they're really anxious and kind of revved up and having a hard time calming their brain and their body. Same with paying attention. If a child is really, really worrying about something or worrying about how they're going to be perceived by their teachers or their fellow students, that makes it so hard to pay attention because they're just in that fight or flight part of their brain and they're not able to be in that rational thinking part of their brain. And same with, of course, ADHD. They could have a really hard time paying attention because of that ADHD. And a lot of times it's both. And we see that, all of us see that in our offices. And so then a lot of times it's trying to tease out which is which. And in my case, if we're treating with medications, then a lot of times we'll start with whichever one seems to be the biggest player and then see what we're left with. Because absolutely, if ADHD is really significant, that's going to increase anxiety because kids are knowing usually that they're not performing to their best ability or that they are struggling in certain areas. And so then that increases their anxiety. And same with if someone is really anxious, then they're not able to pay attention. And so I think it's just helpful to know that there's overlap and then to work on both of those. And it's just, I think, an iterative process where you work on one thing and then you regroup and see what's going on at the next visit, and then you figure out which thing you want to work on next. And that goes, of course, for the non-medication treatment strategies too. We know that sleep absolutely improves executive functioning and emotional regulation, but we also know, unfortunately, that sleep is really hard a lot of times for kids with ADHD and for kids with anxiety. And same with eating, that can be hard for both conditions too. So it is just interesting how much overlap there is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is. It's Go ahead.
I was just going to say the multi-million-dollar question parents always ask when there are both going on. How do you know which one to treat first?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that is so hard. And I will usually ask them or try to suss out what's the biggest pain point right now or what's the biggest challenge. And a lot of times for me, it's what brought you into my office today. Like, what is the thing that you're like, okay, we got to get help with this. And but you're right, it can be hard if it's trouble in school or whatever that is. It can absolutely be hard to figure out which one is the biggest player. And so I think you're right, it's the $1 million
Yeah.
question.
Always hard.
Anecdotally, I have heard that, a lot of times, I think I've heard this more with women that they were diagnosed with anxiety only later to find out that they actually have ADHD and probably anxiety too. But it may have been ADHD, particularly more of that inattentive, that may have been driving the anxiety. And so I find that really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Caroline. I think we see that a lot. And one of our earliest guests that we had on our ADHD Mom Docs podcast was a pair of neuropsychologists who have written
Mm.
a book called Different Thinkers ADHD. And one of them said, kids are always telling themselves a story about what's going on. And so a lot of times if they don't have that helpful label or narrative like this is ADHD, this is why it's hard for me to remember to do certain things, or this is why it's hard for my brain to do XYZ. If they don't know it's ADHD, then they're making up other stories and labels that aren't helpful. Like, well, I guess I'm just not as smart as
Mm.
my friends or something like that. And I think that really fuels the anxiety a lot of times too, because if we always are feeling like we're not measuring up, then that is so hard. And so I think it just makes me thankful that we're talking a lot more about ADHD in girls and women now, and especially like you said, that inattentive ADHD, and hopefully recognizing that earlier so that we have more helpful narratives that these girls and women can be telling themselves.
And
Yeah.
sometimes the anxiety will mask the ADHD a little bit because they're so anxious that they want to do so well. And so they are just working twice as hard, but they're not causing any problems and they have good grades. But I find that sometimes there's a lot of internal distress that just isn't recognized till later. And they don't have like, so when kids don't have the words to express it, like how do you even go about helping kids or helping teens really understand how to find the words or what to look for?
Yeah. I think the first thing, especially when it comes to anxiety, is when I'm working with especially new patients, but patients that I've seen before too. I always ask them how anxiety feels in their body, or how they feel if
Mm.
anxiety isn't really the word that they're familiar with. And we'll talk about, things that stress you out, or what's a time that you felt a little worried or stressed, or whatever word we use. And a lot of times I get this kind of blank look, and they either haven't thought about it before, or they're not sure yet that they want to tell me about it. But I find that it's really interesting to help kids start to know how anxiety or any other kind of negative emotion feels in their body. Um, One, because then it's a starting point. It's a way to acknowledge that. But the other thing is we're wanting to move kids into where they can recognize those feelings in themselves, and then start to do some self-regulation strategies like, taking a few deep breaths, or kind of some reframing of those automatic negative thoughts, or whatever those things look like. But those first steps, I think a lot of times, are just, how does anxiety feel in your body? And so I really work with kids and parents on what that feels like, and what are some things that we could start to do when we're noticing that. Or even if a child doesn't have anxiety, just ADHD, we know that a lot of times parents come in telling us, my child was fine, and then he's like exploding, and there's no middle ground. And so working with kids, and some of that of course is as they get a little older, they get better at recognizing, but starting to recognize, okay, I'm starting to not be in a good place. I'm going from my green zone to my yellow zone. I don't want to get to the red zone. So I have to like I need to go outside for a minute, or I need to run up and down the stairs, or whatever that looks like. Talking about that with kids when they're in their calm space and still in their green zone, I think could be a really helpful starting point.
Teaching kids how to put these things into words and learning to understand them is a lot of why I, as a physician, started working so much with ADHDKC, and then also with the Teach Me program that we each work at. I think there's not enough time in the traditional 15-minute clinic visits that we get to when we see um, kids for whatever they're being seen for. And if anxiety is part of that picture, or ADHD is part of that picture, there's not time to cover all of this stuff. So I know Dr.
Yeah.
Danda does therapy stuff. So she
Yep.
has the time, and that is what she is specifically
Yeah.
designing her clinic about. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
that played a part in how you chose to do the practice that you have or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so, for sure. I was in a spot with my last job where I was seeing kids who were really, really struggling, and I was seeing them for 20 minutes every 5 months or so, and it didn't feel good, and I totally understand there are so many limitations on our healthcare system, and there are so many reasons why as physicians, we often can't see patients as frequently as we want or for as long as we want. But I finally just got to a point where I was like, I don't feel good about practicing this way anymore. I don't feel like my patients feel like I'm helping them. Like when parents are messaging me, I don't have any space in my schedule to get these families in. And so that was part of why I made a change to private practice and to have more control over how often I see my patients and how long I see them, because I needed to make a change to where I felt like I was able to help patients more than I felt like I was able to help them in other settings.
Yeah. I'm a little jealous since I'm still in the traditional pediatric practice, but it is
You
fantastic for
know,
your family. Yeah.
yeah, there's no right way, of course, and there are downsides to the way I'm doing it too, because I can't see everyone that potentially I would want to see, and so yeah, it just is hard, but certainly, yeah, and in traditional practices, it's just hard because there's not enough time to do all of the things, especially like you said, the all of the neuroeducation and that kind of thing that we would like to do.
It's all about trying to find the balance, right? Trying to figure out what works.
It
I feel like that's
is,
what we
yeah.
all do as families is we're all trying to figure out here's what's walking in and how do we make it work. So I'm hoping
Mhm.
I know your upcoming talk is going to talk a little bit about anxiety, so I'm hoping that there'll be some additional strategies and things you can share with families in your upcoming talk because it can be very difficult for parents to really know and understand what to do.
Yeah, and I will just say I love that right now. I think there is so much awareness on the parts of parents and teachers that they really are wanting to help anxious kids. You know, we can talk a lot about pandemic and post-pandemic life, but one thing that I think it did is really put kids and teen mental health on people's radars. And I recently gave a talk about anxiety similar to this talk that I'm going to give to our ADHDKC parent group. I gave it to the public schools district where I live for a teacher in service day. And these teachers got to choose, like throughout our whole district, like pre-K through the high school teachers that got to choose a number of different 1 hour presentations to go to. And there were all different topics. They weren't all mental health by any stretch. And I had been asked to give a talk on anxiety, and they moved my room 2 different times because we just kept filling up more and more and more. And it wasn't
Mm.
like my name or anything like that. It was just the topic that so many people wanted to hear about anxiety and wanted tools to help their students, their own kids. There were coaches there that wanted to help their athletes. And so when I think about that, it just really feels encouraging to me that so many people right now, so many adults that play a big part in kids' lives are wanting to learn more about this and are wanting to be able to help the kids in their lives.
Yeah.
Well, if people would like to learn more from you, which I think you probably have a lot to say, not probably, I know you have a lot to say and a lot to share, then they can join us on Tuesday, June 9th at 6:30 p.m. It's free, it's online. You can RSVP at ADHDKC.org. But maybe you can give us like one of the main takeaways that you want parents to walk away with from your talk inside the anxious brain tools that help kids and teens.
Yeah, it's hard to choose just one, but I will try my best.
Just a
One of
teaser,
the
just a
things,
teaser.
just a teaser. Yeah. One of the things I think about a lot is that I think as a society for a long time, we have been scared of talking about negative emotions, acknowledging negative emotions,
Mm.
but we know that they're there. We know that our kids are angry and frustrated and embarrassed and anxious and afraid and all these things. And I think it is such a relief when we actually do talk about those things, whether we're, a child's parent or their teacher or their physician or their therapist, no matter what our goal is, I think it just really feels good to kids when we acknowledge those emotions. And I think it also, I'll talk some in the talk about how we as adults in, age appropriate ways for the kids that we're interacting with, whether they're our own kids or again, some other kid that we have a relationship with, that we can talk about kind of our own messy middle. I think a lot of times kids look to the adults in their lives, their parents, and they think, oh, well, mom or dad was never like scared to go into their classroom or they never like said something
Oh,
stupid, because we don't always talk about that with our kids. And so I think doing things like highlights and lowlights at the dinner table or sharing one thing that didn't go exactly how we wanted it to go during our day, I think anything we could do to normalize those negative experiences or, things that didn't go super positively for our kids is really important. And then I will just do a part two to the teaser. We don't want anxiety to completely go away. Just like you said, Kristen, anxiety is here for a reason. It has a very protective role. And I do that as part of my education with my patients. I say, hey, I don't want your anxiety to go totally to zero, because I'd like for you to have a little anxiety when you're walking out into the parking lot, because I don't want you to get hit by a car. And it's actually even good if you have a little bit of anxiety before your soccer game or before a presentation at school, because a little bit of anxiety increases your alertness. It shows that you care and you want to do a good job. And so our goal is not to eliminate all stress or all discomfort or anxiety. And we also know, of course, that that's where we grow, right? If we're never putting ourselves in positions to where we feel a little anxious or a little stressed, then we're not trying new things and learning new things and all of those good things. And so I think that's helpful for parents to remember, that our goal is not no anxiety or no distress. Our goal is that we're able to talk about that with our kids and help them move through and feel supported, and also be able to recognize when anxiety is too much and when we need to get professional help to help our kids move through that.
I am so looking forward to hearing your talk on June 9th at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. All you have to do to join us is to go to ADHDKC.org, hit the events button to find more information and sign up.
that's
I'm
And
looking
fantastic.
forward to it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I've already learned a lot about how the brain works and anxiety and ADHD and acupuncture. So many great points that just really hit home today. So I really appreciate you joining us today, sharing your perspective and expertise with us, and can't wait for you to continue to jump in the community and be on the board.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on the podcast.
you're welcome. You're welcome back anytime. And for those of you we didn't really highlight, but she is joining me for the ADHDKC teen group for the middle school and high school kids each month, the first Tuesday of the month. So if you think your teens can learn from her, then have them join us as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.